Is Peter the rock or is he the pebble? This debate started when Jesus changed the name of the apostle Simon to Peter. And this is the verse in question when Jesus says, "And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." So we have two different perspectives. Side A believes that Peter in Greek means rock, while side B believes that Peter in Greek means pebble. Side A also believes that Peter is the rock. So when Jesus is talking about this rock, side A believes that that would be Peter. So Peter is the rock. Now, side B would say Peter is not the rock. And the reason for this is because if the church is being built upon the foundation of the rock, and Peter means pebble, then pebble, this small stone, cannot be the foundation. Now, of course, that brings the question, what is the rock then? And side B would say either Jesus himself is the rock, or Peter's confession of faith is the rock. We're going to take a look at what that means in a second. Now, there's different conclusions and implications. Side A might argue that since Peter is the rock, this makes him the leader of the apostles and establishes him as the first pope. While side B argues that Peter is not the rock, therefore there are no grounds for the concept of the pope. However, it's more interesting than that because others on side A might not be convinced of the role of the Pope, but still believe in Peter's leadership as the rock. But the goal of this video is really for us to just figure out, what does Peter really mean? Does it mean rock or pebble? Because that's going to have massive implications and that's going to help us really figure out which side we're on. So, by the way, my name is Santi and I spent ages, like so many hours, putting together these resources that I'm going to show you today to analyze all of this and help us come to the truth of what does Peter mean. Okay? So let's get started, of course, with a bit of context. Here's the verse that we are talking about. Now, I'm taking this part. This is the part that we're analyzing the most. Obviously, this part of the verse, and it's very important. It's so important that I made a whole video about this. You can go check it out if you want. But we're going to really focus everything that we can on this video to just determine what does Peter mean. So we're going to read at this context. Now, yes, I know that I could read the whole of chapter 16. I know there's other things to debate in here, but for the sake of this video, I just want to focus on what does Peter mean, okay? So if someone tells me in the comments, you got to read the context, I'm trying, but there's only so much I can zoom out. I'm not going to go back to Genesis for the whole thing. Either way, we're just going to go back to verse 15 in chapter 16 of Matthew. Jesus in here, so Jesus, he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" He's asking this to the apostles, okay? So there's all the 12 apostles, and he's asking them the following. "Who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Now, this is what is known as the confession of faith. So this right here, Peter's confession of faith, side B might argue that that would be the rock. So that is one of the arguments to keep in mind. Now, verse 17. "And Jesus answered him, 'Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you're Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it.'" Verse 19, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth," by the way, other translations say to forbid. That's maybe an easier way to understand it. "Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose, to permit, whatever you lose on earth will be loosed in heaven." So yeah, we're going to focus on this, but that is a wider context I wanted to show you. Now, here we have a little bit of an analysis I want to show you on language, right? So Peter is the name that we have in English, and we obviously have the word rock in here. Now, side A would argue that this essentially reads like this: "You are rock, and on this rock I'll build my church," versus side B argues that it should read more like this: "You are pebble, and on this other thing, on this rock, I'll build my church." So you can see why that changes the meaning. Now, let's obviously take a look at the Greek. So what are the original words being used? "I tell you, you are Petros, and on this Petra, I will build my church." Now, intuitively, we can see that, okay, this word is not exactly the same as this word. Why is that? We're going to take a look at that. Side B in here that argues for pebble might say, okay, if he really meant that Peter is the rock, why not just use the same word? Why not just say, "You are Petra, and on this Petra, I'll build my church"? That seems to be a lot more intuitive. So we have to take a look at, okay, what is even the reason for changing Petra to Petros, right? So let's start there. Let's take a look at that. So Petra definitely means rock. Both side A and side B can agree that Petra means rock. No problem there. Now, what is Petros? So what's happening in here is that there is definitely something with gender, right? So with language, there's gender where, okay, here's an example. This bottle right here, I speak Spanish, so I'm just going to give you something you might be familiar with, right? This is la botella. So it's feminine bottle, because in languages like Spanish, in languages like Greek, there's gender assigned to objects, which in English obviously is a very strange concept. Now, this is a pen, right? In Spanish, it would be el esfero, so masculine pen, right? So in Greek, there's the same concept of gender, right? So Petra would be feminine rock, right? So when we read this right here, what happens is that the reason why Simon's name is not Petra is because Petra would be feminine. So it would be giving Simon a girl's name, right? Which Jesus wouldn't want to do. Now, that would explain why this word that is feminine has been changed into a masculine form. And this is how you would do it in Greek, right? So that already kind of explains the reason why it's not Petra Petra, but why we have Petros Petra. Okay. Now, side B would argue actually Petros does have a different meaning. So maybe Jesus did intend a separation of meaning. Now let's take a look at this. We have Koine Greek. This is the type of Greek that is used in the New Testament. So Koine means common. So this would be common Greek, right? And then what's interesting is that the word Petros, does that mean pebble? Where's that argument coming from? And the thing is that one could argue that it means pebble, but in Attic Greek. So Attic Greek is what is called ancient Greek. Now, what's interesting is that Attic Greek was replaced by Koine Greek around 300 years before Christ. This means that around 300 years before Christ, Attic Greek was already being replaced by Koine Greek. So Koine Greek is the Greek of the New Testament, and it was the common established type of Greek. So that means that if Jesus actually meant pebble, he was maybe making a reference of 300 years ago. So that is the context of where side B is coming from. He's saying, yes, ancient Greek might have used the word Petros to refer to pebble. Therefore, maybe Jesus intended that. The other important thing is that we already know that Matthew was written in Koine Greek. So it's important to consider a few things. What language did Jesus speak? What language did the apostles speak? And of course, within this context, which is the language that was likely to be used? And that's where we're led towards Aramaic. It is fair to assume that this original verse was spoken in Aramaic. So let's take a look at the Aramaic. Now, Kepha means rock, and this is how it would read. I tell you, you are Kepha, and on this Kepha, I'll build my church. So this supports the idea of reading it like this. Tell you, you are rock, and on this rock, I'll build my church. Right? So the Aramaic does seem to support side A, but some people on side B might be like, okay, where are you getting this all from? Like, how do we know that this is the exact word? I'm glad you asked. We're going to take a look at that next. So John 1:42, it reads like this. He brought Simon to Jesus, who looked at him and said, you are Simon, son of John. You are to be called Cephas, which is translated Peter. You might be like, okay, wait a second. It says Cephas in there. That's not the exact same thing as Kepha. What is happening here is, if you take a look at what Kephas means, is that this doesn't have a meaning in Greek itself. I mean, where is that coming from? Here's the thing, Kephas in Greek, it is just an adaptation of this word in Aramaic that means rock. I wanted to come up with a useful example. This would be kind of like when there's name variations across languages. For instance, from English to Spanish, you might have the name Philip that would be adapted to Felipe. We have Jonathan that could be adapted to Jonathan. Andrew, Andres. So that kind of thing. As names go from one language to another, you will see changes in spelling, you will see changes in pronunciation, but it's still the same name. So that is what would happen here, from Kepha to Kephas in Greek, right? So that is how we know that Kephas in Greek is just making reference to Kepha in Aramaic. So that's how we get this logic. It would read, and I tell you, you are Kepha, and on this Kepha I'll build my church, pointing towards side A on I tell you, you are rock, and on this rock I'll build my church. That is what I would say is a good argument for side A. Now, of course, there's a bit more to this because we have to read things in context, like everyone loves saying, we gotta read it in context. So we're gonna do a bit more of that. Now, if we go to this table, by the way, shout out to Jimmy Akin, who came up with this really nice way to break things down. I just presented them in a different way. Okay, so as you can see here, we have verse 17, 18, and 19. Now, there's a couple of interesting logical things that help us understand a little bit more of how things are read. Okay, so here we have verse 17 has Simon Peter as a principal subject, meaning that this sentence, this whole verse, is about Simon. Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. So yes, this makes sense. The principal subject of this verse is definitely Simon Peter himself. Now, verse 19 also has Peter as a principal subject. How do we know this? Let's take a look. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Now, there's some people on side B that would argue that when it says, I will give you, that this is referring to all the apostles and not just Peter. But we know the following. We know that this you is singular you. So this is referring to Peter. It's using the Greek word si, which is singular you. So we know for sure that this is also referring to Peter. So we know that both of those verses, this one and that one, both talking about Peter as a principal subject. So it makes sense to believe that verse 18 also has Peter as a principal subject. Now let's explore that theory. If it were to mean pebble, there's no real importance in Simon Peter and his role within what is said in this verse. Therefore, if it were to mean pebble, then this would not have Simon Peter as a principal subject, which would break the flow of how this reads. If we take a look at if Peter means rock, then the principal subject is definitely Peter, because it's talking about how Peter is rock and how on this rock I will build my church. Like that is all referring to the role of Peter. And so if it means rock, then this logic definitely follows a little bit smoother. Now let's take a look at the next one. Verse 17 is a blessing given to Peter. I mean, this one is very clear because blessed are you. Jesus is literally blessing Simon Peter, right? Now, verse 19, let's take a look. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. This is definitely giving him, if nothing else, like a gift, perhaps some authority, but definitely something being given to Simon Peter. So that would definitely count as a blessing as well. So these two verses are blessings. Verse 18, now let's take a look. If Peter means pebble, then that's not a blessing because this would read as follows. I tell you, you are pebble, and on this rock, not referring to Peter, I will build my church. This definitely doesn't seem like a blessing. Like it's almost like saying your role in this whole thing is quite insignificant, and then I'll change subject to something else that is not referring to you, Peter. You see, so like this definitely breaks the flow of the blessing structure, right? A blessing, another blessing. This one would not be a blessing. Now, if Peter means rock, let's take a look at how that reads. I tell you, you are rock, and on this rock, referring to Peter, I'll build my church. This definitely would be a blessing because then Jesus would be blessing him with an important title, with an important role in everything related to building the church. So this definitely flows better following that logic. So that is that argument right there. And then the last one right here would be as follows. In verse 17, the explanation reinforces the opening. Okay, let's see what we mean by this. So let's just take a look at these two verses right now. What we mean by the explanation reinforces the opening is that what is said in here, Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, is that what is said after that reinforces what was said in here, elaborating upon it. For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. This one in here is like, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and then elaborating, explaining what that means. Whatever you bind, whatever you lose. So this definitely reinforces what is said in here. And then in verse 18, does the explanation reinforce the opening? If it means pebble, I tell you, you are pebble, and on this rock, which is not referring to you, I'll build my church. The explanation would not be reinforcing the opening. It would be more like changing the subject kind of randomly, to be fair, where I tell you you're pebble, so hold that thought, and now I'll tell you something else. On this rock, which is not referring to you, I'll build my church, right? So the explanation does not reinforce the opening. Versus if Peter means rock, then it absolutely, the explanation reinforces the opening. I tell you, you are Peter. You might be like, okay, what does that mean? And then it continues to explain what does that mean. On this rock, I'll build my church. If you are the rock, I'm telling you that you will act as a foundation of the church. So that seems to go a lot better with the context and the flow of all of that. So all of those reasons seem to reassure and reaffirm the fact that Peter means rock, and when we're talking about this rock, it is referring to Peter. Now, if you haven't guessed it already, I'm definitely on side A. So unfortunately, I just think that people that have been on side B, it seems like an easy thing to believe, but as soon as you take a look at it, there's really no good reason to believe that Peter means pebble, and there's a lot of good reason to believe that Peter means rock. It is my goal to help people at least go from side B into side A, even if the conclusion is this one right here. Right? Now, hopefully you look further into things and find good reason to believe all of this. It is my hope that we either develop the conversation further and hear better arguments from side B, or to just abandon side B completely. So if you have someone that you've been arguing about this whole thing with, send them this video. Hopefully that's helpful. And if any of you is still not convinced, I would like to ask you this question. What do you make of the argument of the Aramaic? The Aramaic was what convinced me personally. But I want to ask you this, regardless of all the arguments presented in this video, if Peter means pebble, why did Jesus change Simon's name to Peter if it means pebble? What was the reason for doing that? Okay, so hopefully that is helpful, and I hope you enjoyed this video. God bless. See you in the next one.